Now, South Africa's seaports now being ranked among the most inefficient in the world. This is denting the country's trade and investment opportunities. Issues like cable theft and other capacity constraints due to underinvested infrastructure have stopped Transnet from fully benefiting from the recovery in commodity prices and increased demand for rail and shipping capacity. Let's unpack this further with the Road Freight Association's Chief Executive Officer, Gavin Kelly, joining us now virtually this hour. Gavin, good afternoon. I mean, okay, rankings are rankings, but we know the true state of our roads, our rail infrastructure, and our ports. I mean, we could do much better.
Good afternoon, Dan. Good afternoon to all your listeners. Yeah, it's almost like the World Cup, isn't it? Rankings are rankings. And if you don't get it right on the specific day, even if your ranking is very, very high, you could see yourself with problems. So I think what's important is we need to understand why it is we're slipping down the rankings. Is it because of our efficiencies? Is it because we just are not doing what we used to do? And the speaker from Transnet, I think it was Transnet, had some important things to mention, which really then points a rather dire picture, because those big ships that he was referring to haven't just arrived on the horizon yesterday. They've been around for some time. So the first question one must ask is, why haven't we started improving the port already? That's the first question, I think. Secondly, is we have to make sure that those terminals he's referring to, and which terminals are these? Are these private terminals, or is it the actual Ports Authority, the Transnet terminals themselves, are not operating and need to be held accountable? Didn't we just have a long strike with Transnet workers down at the port in Durban, which held that port for about 2.5 weeks? So that's the next question, is understanding who is creating the backlog and how we hold them accountable, and will we hold them accountable?
Yeah, I think these are very important questions, but the fact remains we need an efficiently operated Port of Durban to benefit from, for example, the rise in commodity prices as we export more from our mines.
Oh, Dan, there's absolutely no question to that. We need to have a port that operates efficiently. It needs to operate 24 hours a day. Now, the port is open 24 hours a day, but there are some stakeholders who say the various terminals around the port that need to either process exports through the port or bring them imports through the port aren't operating 24 hours a day. You're 100% correct. We've got a boom happening right now. We are struggling to get cargo or bulk out of the country for various reasons, whether it's a railway line that's dysfunctional on the one hand, and on the other hand, it seems that our ports are clogged. So we have to find a system, we have to find an answer, and we need to find it now.
When you, as the Road Freight Association, deliver goods at the port, where are the biggest headaches?
Well, first of all, it's really getting in and out of the port. So we've been struggling with various queuing processes, registration processes. So what's happening right now is Transnet's bringing another registration process for drivers and trucks into operation that comes into operation on the 1st of October. So one of the biggest challenges we have at the Port of Durban, and probably at most ports, is that we have these huge queues of trucks standing, waiting either to drop off boxes or containers or to pick them up. So we need to fix that. And there are various ways that's done around the world, and perhaps we should look at doing that. And maybe one of them is having a short distance dedicated railway line that runs from, let's say, for example, the Port of Durban to Cato Ridge, and it moves the boxes up there, or the containers up there, sorry, I refer to them as boxes, moves them up there, and the trucks can get them there. And you've got this continuous cycle of, whether it's trains or trucks, various ports around the world use different systems. So we keep evacuating or clearing the port and bringing exports in, and there isn't this bottleneck right around the port where trucks stand for days on end.
Yeah, Kevin, as usual, when we're faced with these kind of challenges, we'll ask, what's the role of technology and innovation here? Do you think it could help?
Oh, yes, definitely. We know exactly which containers have left their ports of origin. So, for example, if there are containers coming from China or there are containers coming from Germany, they're pre-cleared. SARS has got a wonderful system that it's taken a couple of years to put in place. It's learned from the best around the world. We're part of that. As a customer, you can see where your container's been loaded and what its destination is, and its determined time of arrival with one or two weather issues, I suppose, by sea. So we can use technology and we can say exactly where that container is, and we can get that truck to that container immediately. We don't need to stand in queues for that.
If SARS can get it right using technology and go for the best benchmarks in the world of how to facilitate movement of these containers from various ports and harbors around the world, why can't Transnet itself, to address backlogs, also use technology so that you don't queue for so long?
Yeah, and that's a difficult question to answer. On the one hand, one must presume that Transnet has such technology. Surely it must have. In a number of years ago, you could see at City Deep, which is up in Johannesburg, when containers arrived at the port and what their destination or expected time of arrivals would be. So perhaps having seen a number of these cyber attacks, or perhaps with Transnet and between SARS and Transnet, there's a little bit of rivalry between government departments or organizations. It's a very, very interesting question to answer, but one would presume that with somebody like SARS, who literally has all information about anything that moves in and out of the country, that Transnet would be able to link into that.
Yeah. Do we need an upgrade at our ports at Durban? I mean, to facilitate movement as well, but also capacity-wise. Gavin, what's your sense as a Road Freight Association? What are your members telling you?
Well, I think, Dan, there are three things. The first thing is, if we look on the sea side of the quay, you would have heard the speaker previously talking about the ships getting much bigger, so they need to dredge the port or deepen it. They've got to build longer quays. So there is that physical change that needs to happen. Ships are definitely getting bigger. They've gone from about 6,000 containers. You now have ships with 15,000 on there. So they are really, really big ships. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we've got to sit down and ask ourselves, is there not a simpler way of clearing the port and getting export boxes in? Why do we have these huge stacks in the port that seem to always have the box in the wrong place? So when a truck gets there to pick up a box, it always seems to be at the bottom of a stack, no matter how we've tried to sort that out. So that's the next question. Can we not follow the examples of Rotterdam, or Hamburg, or Shanghai, or San Francisco, where we evacuate the boxes through a little system on its own, whether it's truck or train, getting it to a site away from the port that we can get the boxes. And then finally, we need to make sure that if we're going to stack the trucks, that there are safe places for them to stay. It's not on the roadside or in local residential areas, and that it's pretty simple to get the boxes in and out to those staging sites if we're going to use that.
Yeah, when you hear Gavin Kelly says boxes, he means containers, just to make sure our viewers understand. Now, anecdotally, Gavin, or factually, which is the best port currently in Africa? What do you know? I mean, we used to have our ports. Now I just read the introduction saying that even KwaNgqura in the Eastern Cape and Cape Town and now Durban, we're now lagging behind. Yes, these are rankings, but they are telling a real story for us because we can see there's a problem in our ports. But who's doing better than us on our continent, who's not far away from whom we can learn to do better? What do you know?
Gee, Dan, that sounds like an Eddie Jones question. I've got to be very careful where I go with that one. The first thing that we need to understand is that the ports in South Africa hold far more volume of freight and a whole different selection of freight than what the neighboring ports around us handle. So that's an important thing to understand. You've got to compare apples with apples. So, for example, would you take only the container handling wharf in Cape Town and compare that with Walvis Bay or Lobito or Luanda or Maputo? So we've got to be careful how we compare. If we look at some of the technology and some of the changes, We have a huge challenge with a port just north of Cape Town called Walvis Bay, which is coming up with some very, very good technological ideas. For example, one of the things they're doing is allowing foreign countries like Zambia or Zimbabwe or Angola to have their own sovereign pieces of ground in that port area to clear their cargo through their bonded and their customs processes. So that means that those containers move through that port very, very quickly, far quicker than what they do through our ports. If we look at the Port of Beira, for example, or Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, again, different ports, but they've actually turned around their dwell time. So the amount of time that the container sits in the port not doing anything. So if you had to ask me which was the better port right now, there'd be one of two things we'd have to consider. One is in terms of technological advancement, Walvis Bay. If we look at in terms of fixing their problems, not necessarily redesigning the port, and now really making a difference, then Maputo raises its hand on the African coastline.
Yeah, we need to catch a wake up then from the examples you've used. Or no, we're comparing these little different things, but it all comes together to one, that how are you doing as a port? Are you efficient or not? Thanks for your time, Gavin.